no matter what happens, Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls, because
You know,
Frank knows. Frank's like, I get what you're doing. You're gonna bring me here. You're gonna show me the past. You're gonna hope that I'm having some breakthrough and this emotional breakthrough. And he goes, it's not gonna work on me, pal. And Ghost Christmas Past is like, that's just exactly what someone else said. But when they saw their mother, Niagara Falls.
hello, friends. I'm Anderson Marchak,
And I'm Ricardo Segura.
and we are the Panel Bros. Welcome to the panel.
Welcome to the panel. Yeah.
All right, here we are.
Here we are.
As of this recording, it is late 2023. We are in the holiday season.
Yep.
So it would make sense that the Panel Bros do a Christmas movie.
Yes.
And I'm going to let Ricardo speak for a little bit here. Ricardo, how do you feel about Christmas and Christmas time?
Man, if for those who don't know me, I am a Christmas person to a T. You know what I mean? I am everything about Christmas. I love Christmas. I'm that guy that when November hits, people are like, wait for Thanksgiving. And I'm like, Christmas is here. You know what I mean? I'm blasting the Christmas music. I'm all about the Christmas decorations. You know what I mean? So I absolutely adore everything about Christmas. My second daughter's middle name is Noelle because it's about Christmas. She's a Christmas baby. I love everything about it. It's my favorite holiday. So anytime the holiday season comes around, Christmas movies are a must. I absolutely must. And the movie we're going to talk about today is absolutely at the top of that list when we talk about Christmas movies for me personally.
For me, I appreciate the holiday season. I think it's nice. Obviously, friends and family. You can't beat friends and family, but I care more about when we get to have days off from work and we get to have peace and quiet. That's what I care about. Like, don't get me wrong, I like the friends and family stuff and the holiday season. It's a time of the year where you want to be thankful and stuff like that. But more than anything, I just value my peace. So that's
it's a good thing to value. I'll tell you that.
So, alrighty. Well, our movie was directed by Richard Donner.
Yeah.
And I need to mention this now. The music is by Danny Elfman, and that's going to come into play as we discuss.
So good.
Yeah. And it was released on November the 23rd of 1988. We're looking at 35 years now, 35 years old. Today, the Panel Bros are going to be doing a breakdown for Scrooged.
Absolutely one of my favorite Christmas movies. If not, like, when there's many different iterations of the story Scrooge. There's plenty of them. We've had some released up to just a few years ago with Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell in Spirited. Like, we've seen Scrooged done multiple times. And I like them all for different reasons, but I'm so excited that we're talking about this one because I have such a love for this one.
Yeah, A Christmas Carol, Dickens. It's just been told time and time again. The animated one, the Jim Carrey, comes to mind for me.
Yes,
that's one of them. And then I don't even remember the name, but just the old school one. Like black and white. I remember that too. And then it just continually gets retold time and time again. I think I forget the name of the movie, but Dan Stevens was in it. It was about.
I'm drawing a blank on the name, but I know exactly what movie you're talking about.
Yeah, he oh, I gotta look it up now.
Yeah, I know the movie, and I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, that was the most recent one. I think it was about Dickens writing the movie, or writing the play rather.
Yes.
Of course I can't find it right now, but in any case, the no, we're gonna have this for you guys. We will look this up.
There's so many, like
the man who invented Christmas. Thank you.
There you go. There's that, and then even Michael Caine has stepped up in a Muppets Christmas Carol. Like, there's so many different iterations of this story, and they're all great in their own ways. But Scrooge has a special place in my heart, man. I love this movie.
Yeah, and we're not trying to do give away too much from the talk now, but just with the way that we talk, I just, for those of you listening and watching us, that we love action movies, that we love, we love original takes. We like things that if they go outside the box, and apparently we talk about horror on here, and Scrooge is all those things. It's a little bit of action. It's a little bit of, outside the box. It's a little bit of horror. There's a little
There's
bit of
some horror
everything.
elements in here that are
Yeah,
really good.
there's a little bit of that, and then above all, at 35 years, it's nostalgic at this point, and we love
Yep.
nostalgia here.
Yep.
So, all right, well, let's get started.
Let's do it.
So, first of all, we have this ridiculous opening scene here, and they're in the network boardroom, and they're watching all
Mhm.
these, promotions for the shows coming on and such. And from the start, you have Lee Majors as himself playing the
Yes.
six, the $6 million man, and this like over the top movie where he saves Christmas. There's these special commercials. It's very meta, you
Yes,
know.
very, very.
There's these commercials. Then we have their version of A Christmas Carol with the celebrity cameos. I remember Mary Lou Retton as the as
Yep.
Tiny Tim. There's just a few actors in there too, and such. And that's the show that they're promoting.
Mhm.
And of course, Frank, he's our lead here, played by Bill Murray. They're promoting it as Scrooged because he's very anti-Christmas,
Yes.
So I just remember just watching this again that, we're just really over the top from the jump. We just want to show everything.
Yeah. I remember even being a kid watching that first faux trailer where it's the night the reindeer died and Lee Majors is saving Santa Claus from all like these bad guys and they're shooting guns. Even as a kid, I was like, I kind of want to see that. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to see Lee Majors save Santa Claus from all these bad guys. It's like, what is this? But I do love the take on the meta trailers and whatnot. And then Frank watching that one Scrooge trailer where it's very homey, right? Like it's very, very soulful, very nice. Like, the story of Scrooge. And he's just like, guys, that sucks. And right
Right.
away you get an idea for who Frank really is at this
Right.
moment.
And then he shows his trailer, the
Oh God.
the like red band rated R
Yes.
trailer.
Yes. It's like this red band rated R trailer, and it's like acid rain, drugs, violence, explosions, and you see airplanes explode, and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And there's nothing in it. And it's so funny because there have been commercials today that we have seen. I know that I have seen where I'm like, what is this commercial about? And
Right.
you don't find out until like the last stinger, like the last 3 seconds. And that's what this was. Like this whole commercial, I'm like, what is he advertising? And he's like, Scrooged. And he's like, don't miss it. Your life just may depend on it. And I was like, what are we
Right.
watching? And it's so over the
I
top.
like the board members coming out, and the one guy looks like he's about to throw up, and
Yes, it's so bad.
everyone's
It's
just like
so bad.
sweating, and then the other guy's like, "Oh no, I don't know what we're gonna do
Yep.
now."
And and
So
and obviously nobody wants to say anything because
right,
Frank
they're
is the
scared.
boss.
Right, they're scared of
But
Frank.
it's
Right.
but it's just like this is so morbid. But again, in his mind, he's like, it's not good enough that people want to see it. They need to have to see it. They need it. They have to be so scared to miss it. So he puts this fear in them through this trailer, and it's ridiculous. Like you hear screams, and Frank mimics the screams. He's like, like it's
Yeah.
so utterly ridiculous, but it's so funny.
So with these fake trailers, I thought of a recent comedy, a satire actually,
Mhm.
and well, it came out a while, over 10 years ago, late 2000s. I thought about Tropic Thunder and the fake trailers in the
Oh
beginning of
yes,
Tropic
yes,
Thunder,
yes. Good pull. Good pull.
Yeah, so but this was in the 80s where fake trailers not really they weren't really
Yeah,
happening too
wasn't really
often,
a thing. Yeah,
so but now whenever you see a movie and you see fake trailers, it's like, hey.
it's fun.
All right, so our plot is as follows. We have IBC television executive Frank Cross. He is pushing his company to broadcast an extravagant live production of A Christmas Carol on Christmas Eve,
Christmas Eve.
making the staff work through the holiday. So Frank fires executive Eliot Loudermilk for disagreeing with him and sends cheap IBC monogram towels to most of the people on his Christmas list, including his personal assistant Grace and his brother James, while the powerful and influential people on the list each get an expensive four-head hi-fi stereo VCR.
Yeah.
So to put this into modern day terms, basically everyone's getting a towel, and the quote unquote important people are getting like high-end Blu-ray players or streaming devices.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
So
Like, and it was funny because when he fires Elliot, she tells him his assistant's like, but it's
right,
Christmas Eve, and he's like, thank God or thank you, and I'm like, what? And he goes, stop his bonus, and it's like, oh my
right,
God, like Frank is the worst. So we're getting a taste of who Frank is, and then when he's offering the gifts, and she gets to his brother's name, he even said he goes towel. And she goes, "Your only brother." And he's like, "Towel." And it goes to show you again where Frank stands in this business model where, like you said, all the higher ends are getting this really expensive piece of equipment, where in the 80s, a VCR was a big deal. You know what I
Right.
mean? Um, Getting this high-end piece of equipment, and everyone else is getting a towel. And it's just like making people work through the holidays, firing people over the holidays, and then, the towel gifts to even people like his brother. It's just like, dude, Frank is a Scrooge. Like, he 100% is a Scrooge.
Yeah, so and shout out to, Bobcat Goldthwait as Loudermilk.
Yes.
He does a great job here, and he has this delivery when he performs. He brought
Mhm.
it for this movie as well, and it's just believable. Because
Yeah.
he's scared of Frank too. Of course he is, but the character of Eliot just cares about Christmas and cares about the families, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it cost him his job.
Yeah.
So, seeing the stress Frank is under with the production, Frank's boss, Preston Rhinelander, brings in consultant Bryce Cummings to provide assistance, though Bryce secretly wants Frank's job.
Yep.
So he's coming in like, "Hey, I'm here to help you," and secretly, he wants his job. So the night before the show, Frank is visited by the ghost of his mentor, Lew Hayward, and
Yes.
also unloved miser who died from a heart attack 7 years prior. So Lou warns him 3 more ghosts will appear to him over the next day to help Frank avoid the same fate. So the movie was already over the top before this happened. This
Yep.
is where we start leaning into the supernatural, the
Mhm.
over the top, even more over the top aspects. We have this corpse walking into the room with some nice
Yeah.
practical effects,
Great practical effects.
you
As
know.
a kid, look, as a kid,
Yeah,
I enjoyed this movie, but as a kid, that was scary because
right.
Lou has no eyes. It's completely black and hollow, and the practical effect is really good. Like, he
Yeah.
walks in and it feels like an actual corpse was walking. And again, I remember as a kid just being like, "Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute." But the comedy is able to like keep it in tow. Like Frank's conversation with Luke is comedy, but amazing practical effects.
Yeah, exactly. And uh got to give a shout to the the bit here. He pulls out his gun because obviously he's a rich executive.
Yep.
You never know what'll happen to him when he's going like bang bang, and he's saying bang as he's pulling.
Yeah.
you know it's like, "Hey Frank, I don't care if you hit me, but take it easy on the Bacardi."
Yep. Yep. It's like
so um so he gives him his spiel, obviously, and Frank is like, "Oh, haha, I get it.
yeah.
You're Jacob Marley and I'm Scrooge, and you're coming to me to
Mhm.
warn me." Um, but then it gets scary. He picks him
Yeah.
up by the neck and phases him through the window.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he's dangling him, and he's begging him. He's like, "They're gonna think
Yep.
I took my own life. Don't do this.
Yeah.
Don't do this." And he's laughing at him, and he's just like, "Change your ways. You better
Yep.
change, otherwise you're gonna end up like me." And he doesn't drop him.
No.
The decayed arm starts pulling and
It's so
peeling,
good.
and he falls that way. And but he wakes up in his office chair thinking,
Yeah, it's so good because you see the tendons start to rip and break, and again, we're dipping into that horror atmosphere where, again, he doesn't let him go. Like, Frank is gripping on his forearm so hard that he's pulling off the dead tissue,
yeah.
and Lou's just laughing maniacally, you know what I mean? And then he falls and then wakes up in his chair, and he's still screaming, and again, that whole scene was just it was done so well.
So before Lou vanishes, his ghost, I guess, dials up Claire Phillips, Frank's Frank's lost love from years ago.
Mhm.
And he wakes up, and as the scene ends, he spits up a golf ball to remind him, "No, you weren't dreaming.
Yes.
This is going to happen to you."
I try to catch it even to this day because it's in one take, and obviously they did a really good job because the golf ball's in the glass when he takes the drink, but they did such a good job that you don't see it. Like, I was like, man, like, it's such a simple thing, right? Because again, I remember being a kid watching it. I always go back to when I'm watching this when I was growing up, and he takes a drink, and just this huge golf ball comes out of his mouth, and I remember being like, how they do that? And then realistically, it's like it's in the glass, but they do such a good job with just like a little camera trick that you never see it. But he just drops it, and if you notice, like, when it bounces, it never loses its momentum, and it just keeps bouncing in his face as a constant reminder. It's like, no, like you said, like, no, you were not dreaming.
Yeah, good catch. So Claire comes to the network to talk to Frank, but Frank does not make time for her, and she returns to the homeless shelter where she works.
Hmm.
So He's talking to her, but he's too distracted by what's happening in the studio.
Yep.
This is somebody he
Yep.
hasn't seen in years, the love of his
Yeah.
life, but he's who he is now, and unfortunately, she
I can't
leaves.
remember. I can't remember if it was like 15, 20 years. It was a very, very long
It's a
time.
long time.
And he mentions it to her on the phone. He goes, "Oh, something happened. I know I haven't talked to you." And he looks at his watch. It's a nice little gag. And I'm paraphrasing. It's either 15 or 20 years. And again, she shows up, and this is the kind of testament to who Claire is.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because she just shows up. This is a guy she hasn't talked to in many, many, many years, who we find out through the movie they had a relationship. But at this point, like, she just shows up and she goes, "No, I heard your voice. That was scared. Like, you were scared. What was wrong?" But he's so distracted by the job, and he's still being frank. And she's just like, "Oh, okay. Like, like, when you want to talk, like, we'll talk." But she goes back to the homeless shelter that she works at.
Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out to Karen Allen.
Love her.
That's who plays Claire, and she's probably most well known for the Indiana Jones movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, as Marion. So, alrighty, let's pull back here. So, as the rehearsals start, Frank wraps up his lunch with Preston because he goes out to lunch, and lunch is kind of memorable here.
Yes,
He sees an eyeball in his glass, and he's screaming
bro.
at the glass, and everyone's just like, "What's wrong with Frank?"
Yeah, like,
You know?
his boss is like, "Don't unravel on me." He thinks he's cracking under the pressure. And again, this is another scene that showcases a little bit of a horror element, because it's not just the fact that it's an eyeball. It's an eyeball with with like the red behind it, like that red. I don't even know what you would call it, but it's muscle tissue, and it just looks disgusting. And it's just sitting in there, and he's just screaming. And everyone's like, "It's just a glass of water." And he, without saying a word, he's just trying to mimic, like, "Can you get it away?" And they're like, "We'll take it away." And Bryce, though, but you can see it on Bryce's face. Bryce is like, yes, like, Bryce wants this guy's job, and he's kind of just like, "Okay, this is good."
Right. And then another thing that happened is he sees that the waiter's on fire,
Yes.
and he grabs some water and throws some water on him. So, um, Stephen King's It didn't come out as a miniseries until 1990, I believe.
Hmm.
So, yeah, 1990. Um, Scrooged was released in 1988. So, I'm not saying this happened, but maybe the writers of Scrooge might have read the book. The book was released in 86. Because you
Okay.
remember that dinner. It was
Yes.
that horrifying dinner that they had around the table. All these scary things were happening, but they didn't happen at all. It was all in their mind.
Yeah.
So I thought about that as they were at dinner time. So Frank is then visited by the ghost of Christmas past, appearing as a manic taxi driver.
I love this character.
Yeah.
I love this character.
So we're just in it now at this point. Um, so we get this time traveling cab, and once again, a little Back to the Future reference, because it's complete with the dial going
Hmm.
back in time, and Back to the Future was released before this.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Who knows? You never look. You never know. I love finding little catches like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're going to give a shout out to the cast as well eventually, but um, we have David Johansen as the
Yes.
actor that played the ghost of Christmas past. He has an alter ego by the name of Buster Poindexter, and he
Okay.
sings the song in the 80s, Hot, Hot, Hot.
Oh my God. Okay.
So
Okay.
that's him. But, obviously he had a bunch of roles as
Hmm.
David Johansen, the actor. So I had to get that deep cut out there because that's fun to me.
Yeah.
So he takes Frank to see his past,
Hmm.
and he finds solace in television to compensate for a cold and distant father. So all Frank did was watch
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah.
And um, what did the scene happen? He said, no matter what happens, Niagara Falls. You're,
Niagara Falls, because
you
he's
know,
because Frank knows. Frank's like, "I get what you're doing. You're gonna bring me here. You're gonna show me the past. You're gonna hope that I'm having some breakthrough and this emotional breakthrough." And he goes, "It's not gonna work on me, pal." And Ghost Christmas Past is like, "That's just exactly what someone else said." But when they saw their mother, Niagara Falls, and he's betting on that, and he's absolutely betting on that.
right. And guess what? It
Yup.
happens.
Yup.
He saw his himself, and his dad brought meat home, veal. I
Hmm.
want to say
Veal. Yep.
5 pounds of
Yep.
veal, and he drops it down and he's like, "Oh, but I wanted a choo-choo train." It's like, "Oh, well, you should be thankful that I brought this meat home for you."
Yeah.
And the mom says something nice to Frank before she leaves the room, and she's like inches away from present day Frank standing there,
Yeah.
and he just starts crying. He just
Yep,
starts
and
crying,
that's all it took. That's all it took, man,
and
because
then yeah, right. Christmas passes like Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls. Because it's so sad because he like, again, you see him and he's 4 years old, and he drops the veal, and he's like, "Is it a choo-choo?" And he goes, "No, it's a 5 pound of meat, a veal." And he goes, "But dad, I wanted a choo-choo." And then the dad is he's just very mean and cold. And he goes, "Well, why don't you go out and get a job and buy yourself a choo-choo?" And the mom, she just like, "Take it easy on him, he's only 4." And then he starts ridiculing the boy even more. He goes, "I'm tired of excuses, my back hurts, I'm only 4." And he sits down, and the mom, she still says something to Frank, and "Good night, Frankie Angel." And he's like, "Good night, mama." And then that's all it takes. And he sees his
Mm,
mom, and it's just so pure. And he starts bawling, dude. Like, he
right.
just straight cries.
Yeah, it's crying, and it's the only time we see this type of emotion from him until the very end, obviously.
Yep.
And what does Frank do? He says, "I was
Yep.
touched by the gift,"
By the gift.
because that veal would be so expensive nowadays,
Yep.
and my father was thinking about me, and then the ghost of Christmas Past is like, "Yeah, whatever,"
Dude,
so
this is a great back and forth because he's trying so hard to be stubborn. And he was like, "No, I was touched by the gift. Veal would go by this much today." And then he goes, "But you're not going to sit here and make me pretend that I didn't do anything with my life." And it goes, Chris Pratt's like, "You basically did nothing. Like, you grew up doing nothing." He goes, "No, one time I hit a home run and won the big game." And he goes,
right.
"No, that's a lie. That was this television show." And he was like, well, one time I was with this girl going down the meadow, and she had flowers in her hair." And he goes, "That was Little House on the Prairie." And he
Yeah.
was like, "Was that the homecoming episode of Little House?" He goes, "That was the homecoming house of Little Prairie." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And it was just great back and forth because Frank is somewhat delusional to a degree, because he's trying so hard to be like, "No, my life wasn't it wasn't as bad as you're trying to make it out to be. It wasn't as sad as you're trying to make it out to be. I'm crying because of this, and I actually had really good things." And it was like, no, and Ghost Goes Bad isn't letting him slide. And I like that.
Yeah. So then he's reminded of how he had fallen in love with Claire,
Hmm.
but lost her when he prioritized his television career over her.
Yeah.
He chose Frisbee the dog over her.
Frisbee you chose Frisbee the
Right.
dog over Claire. And I was like, yeah. And it was that whole situation is interesting too, because they have dinner plans with their friends. And Lou, who we met already as a corpse, is like, "Oh, hey, let's go out and have dinner." So Frank is all like, "Hey, this is the big opportunity that we need." And she's like, "Oh, well, we can do that later. Like, we have Christmas plans already with our friends." And he's like, "Oh, well, we see them all the time. We can see them next week." And she goes, "But it's Christmas. Like, this is the time we spend together." And he goes, "If you can just stop being selfish for a minute and think about Frisbee Dog Show, things will work out." And you can see that, like, she's hurt. Like, she's hurt.
Right.
And she's just like, "Oh, um, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't know how much it means to you." And he's not catching it. He's like, "Oh, it's okay. I'm willing to forgive you." You know what I mean? Like, he's not hearing her. And she even brings up the idea of like, "Well, maybe we should stop seeing each other for a while." And again, not clicking. It's not clicking because he's so endowed in the show and the business aspect of it. He's not listening to her. And he's like, "All right, well, maybe if I'll try to come by if I have time." Didn't listen to a single word she said.
Right. Because
She literally
right,
didn't
because in
matter.
his mind, he's thinking, "All right, I've been scraping and
Yep.
sacrificing. Now I don't have to play. I more than likely I won't have to play frisbee. I can
Yeah.
start moving up the chain." And now
Mhm.
you're seeing how he started to being all the way at the top.
Yep.
But this is where he started. Um, yeah, very sad. I saw when she said maybe you should take a little break, and he didn't, that was heartbreaking.
'Cause he didn't
So
catch it. That's the worst part, is
yeah,
that, like, she's like, "Maybe we shouldn't see each other for a little while." And instead of him being like, Wait, what are you talking about?" He goes,
mm.
Well, I'll try to come by if I have time." And it's like, you're not listening to her, man.
Right,
It's
and
just it's just sad.
you saw the cute scenes that they had before then, where
Oh, they were adorable.
something fell on his head, and that's how he got the nickname Lumpy,
Yeah.
and, they were in the apartment, and they were unwrapping presents, and you see Frank outside the window just smiling, looking at everything,
Yes.
remembering,
Yes.
and I'm just like, "Oh, man, you guys you're gonna hit us," and then they hit us
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
So, after this visit, Frank goes to the shelter to see Claire, hoping to make amends. So the ghost brings him back to present day. And However, his attitude quickly sours and he shows his contempt for a homeless man named Herman and the shelter workers. He returns to the studio, but not before telling Claire, "Scrape it off, Claire. If you want to save someone, save yourself."
Save yourself. Yeah.
All she told him was, "I just need 1 minute, Frank. I
Yeah.
just need 1 minute. I'm taking care of something. Fire them. They're volunteers, Frank. I
Yeah,
can't fire them." And
this
she's
was a wild scene,
right,
man.
right,
It was a wild scene because again, he's at a homeless shelter of all places, and he's having this kind of a reaction. She's willing to spend time with him and talk to him, and there's a situation with the turkey, and she goes, "Oh, let me take care of this." He's like, "No, have them take care of it." And then she's like, "Well, this is what I need to do this." And it turned into this argument. And like you said, he goes, "Scrape them off, Claire. You want to save someone, save yourself." And it's very cold.
right,
It's very cold after everything that he's gone through, even after seeing all those memories with Claire and going in the past and seeing how joyful he was with her. In this moment, he kind of reverts back just like that really fast. And it just stinks because you want to see him grow and he's just not there yet. And again, when he's like, "You'll fire them," and she's like, "They're volunteers." You know what I mean? And it just ends really abruptly. And she says it, like you said, she goes, "If you just give me 1 minute," and that's not good enough for him.
no,
And he still takes off, and it's like, geez, man.
yeah. So the ghost of Christmas Present arrives
Oh my
as
god.
an ethereal, sweet voiced fairy who punches, kicks, and slaps Frank to focus his attention. This is
Yes.
hilarious. This character makes me laugh every single
She's great.
time.
Yes.
She takes him to Grace's apartment. And by the way, you can hear the Danny Elfman score just
Mhm.
kind of blasting. This is one of the moments throughout the movie you hear it, but one of the moments you hear it just because it's mystical, she's
Yes.
floating, she's being sweet and he thinks she's gonna be sweet, but she punches him right in the face. It's
She's
great.
so violent, but it's so funny. It's
Yeah,
absolutely hilarious. Because at this point, you feel like Frank needs to be slapped around a little bit.
right.
So she does that just fine.
So she takes him to Grace's apartment, showing his assistant's struggles to support her large family,
Mhm.
including her youngest son, Calvin, who has remained mute since witnessing his father's death. The ghost then shows him James spending a humble yet festive Christmas with a group of friends and his wife, Wendy, so his brother and his sister in law. James still defends Frank despite Frank's cheap gifts and his
Yep.
refusal to share in Christmas celebrations with him. The ghost leaves him in a utility space under a sidewalk with Herman, who Frank finds to his shock has frozen to death. So this was the
Yep.
homeless man he had met earlier at the shelter. And now he sees him and it's just like, hey, hey, knock it off, Herman. Very funny. It's like,
Yeah.
no, he's frozen solid. And
Frozen death.
obviously it's over the top. He's blue with icicles coming down from his nose or anything to drive the point home. But once
Yeah.
again, just eerie,
Yeah.
very eerie, a little bit of horror again, you know?
Yeah, like even the music that they use in this particular scene, because like when he finds Herman, he's like, "Herman, woo, Herman!" He's clapping, and like Herman isn't moving. And goes, "Herman," and he goes, "Oh man, I guess I should have given you the $5 or whatever." And he taps Herman, and the watch that he was holding, it just kind of drips, and he realizes he's dead. And like Frank gets angry, and he's like, "You moron, you jerk." He goes, "Why didn't you stay with Claire? She would have kept you warm. You'd have been safe." And he's just so upset. But like you said, like the way it's done, like he's frozen with a smile on his face. Like he's
Right.
just, and there's icicles and everything else. And he gets really, really upset. And the whole situation is just it's tragic because this is a guy that we met just a few moments earlier and he's frozen to death. And Frank's like, "Why didn't you stay with Claire?" Which is a bit of irony when we're yelling that at Frank the whole time. Like, why didn't you just stay with Claire? Like, you could have just. And he's in the situation of saying the same thing. But eventually, he busts himself out of there.
Yeah, but now he's thinking, "I gotta get out of here because I'm gonna freeze to death."
Yep.
So, Frank desperately tries to escape, breaking through a boarded up door to end up back on the set of production. So he goes from the fantasy back to the reality here, so to speak. And, Preston directs Bryce to take over rehearsals to give Frank some time off. Retiring to his office, Frank finds a drunken and deranged Eliot waiting for him armed with a shotgun,
Oh
ready to
man.
kill Frank for causing the loss of his job, family, and home. Frank escapes into an elevator where the Grim Reaper like ghost of Christmas future awaits.
Yes.
And the ghost takes him to a future where a now catatonic Calvin has been institutionalized. Claire has heeded Frank's words, leading to her marrying rich, um, living a decadent lifestyle, and viewing the homeless with disgust. So we're going
Yep.
to take a break here before we go to that final scene there.
Yeah.
So Frank meets the ghost of Christmas Future. Once
Yeah.
again, great practical effects.
Yep.
Just it's the face is like a TV screen.
It's a monitor. It's a TV screen,
Yeah,
and I thought that was really, really cool based on the whole idea that Frank's whole life at this point in time
right.
is television. It's just like, hey, like it's TV, it's this and it's that. And then one of my favorite things is that he opens the robe of
Yeah,
death,
there we
and
go.
it's just you just see the souls of people that are trapped, and they're screaming and they're in agonizing pain, and he just kind of closes it and goes, and he opens it again, he looks at it, and it's just screaming torturous pain. He closes it, goes, did our people do that? We're gonna get a lot of calls. But it's a great horror feel again,
Right.
like that's pretty shocking. You know what I mean? Like you're not expecting to see that. Instinctively, I'm like, oh, you would see just nothing but skeleton, right? That's all. You just see nothing but skeleton because that's how it's always been perceived because of skeleton hands and the skeleton face, if you see a face at all. And it's like, no, you're going to see the souls of those trapped for all eternity. And it was like, oh my God. But yeah, it was done in such a scary way that I love it. I absolutely love it.
Now, typically, the ghost of Christmas Future does not speak. It just
Nope.
directs, points, and that's about it. So to have the monitor kind of give some type of, auditory cue or to play Frank's words back to him,
Yes.
things like that, I really enjoyed that about Ghost of Christmas Future. Um, so obviously, he's heartbroken seeing Calvin end up in the institution.
Yeah.
And then to drive the point home, he sees Claire become him.
Yeah.
He sees Claire become this cold-hearted person, and to see her be so nasty to those homeless kids, and she mouths the words back to she says the words that he said to her,
Yeah.
"Scrape them off, Claire. Say them for yourself." And he's mouthing the words because he
Yeah.
remembers now he said that to her. So
Yeah.
now we have to have the climax, so to speak. Finally, the ghost shows Frank's cremation ceremony. He's saying, "Oh, is that my
Yeah.
brother?" Because he sees, his sister-in-law. Oh, now he sees James. It's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, great. Oh, I get it. Now I'm in the box, right? Just like
Yeah.
Ebenezer saw his own grave. Is that what you're
Yeah.
going to do to me?" And James and Wendy are in attendance, but Frank is this scares Frank because he's not even in the right mindset. And now he's just like, all right, fine, I'm gonna die, but don't let them burn me.
Yeah. It
Don't let
was. This is such a good scene because it illustrates one, no one else is there, first of all. Like there's nobody there. It's
right.
just James and Grace. Like that's
Right,
it. Like
right. Good point. Nobody
that's
came.
it's so important that like there's nobody else. It's just his brother, and she's most likely there because she's there for for her husband, for James. And Frank is like, and he even says, he goes, well, why are you showing me this? Like, I can't really make any changes if I'm dead. Like, so I died. So what? You know what I mean? And then when it starts to go into the fire, there's like a real panic that kicks in for Frank. And he starts grabbing at it. And he's pulling, he goes, oh, come on, James, don't let him burn me. And then like there's slip-ups in his dialogue that are so great because there's a point where he stops calling James James and calls him Jimmy. And he reverts back to being a kid. And he's like, Jimmy, please don't let them burn me. And then he's pulling at it. And he's like, please don't let him burn me. And the next thing we see, he's inside the coffin and his feet are on fire and he's kicking and he's screaming. And he's like, I don't want to. And then he calls out to his mom. And that hit because it was like again, we've seen Frank fight and be stubborn and everything. And this is like, we've seen him showing a little bit of remorse here and there, like little moments, like again with when Claire said, "Scrape him off, Claire." And when she repeated the words, you could see he felt bad about it. So there are moments where we do see it, but this is the moment. This is the break. Like this was the break. And again, I felt like for him calling his brother James Jimmy, and then him calling
Yeah.
out
Good.
him calling out for his mom when he was in
Yes.
the coffin was huge because he's like, no, I don't want to. And he's like, Mom. And I was like, oh, like it got me. And I was like,
Yes.
oh man, it was such a breakthrough that I thought that having that dialogue in those moments were really good.
Yeah, good choices. So obviously he mistaken that James had died, but it wasn't him. It's
Mm.
him. It wasn't James, it was himself. And then eventually, as he's trying to grab the coffin so it doesn't get cremated, he's transported to inside the coffin.
Yep.
And He's about to be incinerated. You see his feet on fire. This is where things are coming to a head now. And I think he might have screamed, "I'll change." I
I think
think,
so. I think so. It
yeah,
goes out.
something to the
Yeah,
effect,
there's a lot. There's a lot of
he's
screaming
saying a
going on
lot of
here.
stuff,
Yeah.
and Bill Murray's just selling the whole moment here. It's
Yeah, dude.
wonderful.
Bill killed it.
Like we had one or two moments of vulnerability as the movie went along, when he
Mhm.
teared up, the Niagara Falls moment, or
Yeah.
when he was watching him and Claire and he's smiling in the window,
Yeah.
remembering all the memories, and when he gets upset because Herman had died and froze to death. But this is
Yeah.
the part where the facade of Frank drops,
Yep.
and
Completely out.
and it's like, what is this? This isn't worth anything if I lose my life.
Yep.
This isn't worth anything. So, and he's screaming, "Don't let them burn me, James.
Don't
Don't let
yeah,
them burn me.
it's so good.
Don't
It's
let
so
them burn
good.
me, Jimmy." So
Yeah.
it's great. So he breaks himself out and emerges from the elevator to face Eliot. So once again, the fantasy ends. Elated to be alive, but oblivious to the fact that Eliot is still trying to kill him, Frank's completely changed demeanor surprises Eliot because he's smiling. He's like, "I'm
Yeah.
alive, and so are you."
Yeah,
He's singing
it's
to him.
so funny. It's so funny.
Yeah. Um, he surprises Eliot, particularly when Frank offers him a high-level executive position, which he accepts
Yep.
because Eliot was the only one brave enough to stand up to
Yep.
Frank. And we didn't touch on this. The other executives were mocking Eliot and
Yeah.
making fun of Eliot because he was standing up to Frank, but Eliot still did the right thing. And now,
Mhm.
even though Eliot was fired and is trying to kill Frank, Frank's just like, "That doesn't matter to me. You were right.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
time to make things right." So he offers him this position. I think it was centered on the family and programming and such. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, with Eliot's help, Frank returns to the production set, secures Bryce in the control room, and breaks into the show's live broadcast to speak of his new appreciation for life. Excuse me, appreciation for life. So the show is over with right now. Now it's
Yep.
Frank just talking live. We'll do it live.
Yep.
He apologizes on air to Grace, James, and the cast and crew, and makes a passionate plea to Claire to come back to him. He gives a little wink to the camera because I think they were playing some type of trivia game. And he says,
Yes.
yeah, he
Yeah.
says, "Hey, James, by the way, it was USS Minnow." You
Yes.
know?
Because they were playing a game and they were asking questions and he couldn't figure it out, and I love that moment. He goes, "Oh, and by the way, James, the answer to what boat got him to the island or whatever," and he goes, "It was yes, Minnow. No
Right.
points for you this round, James." And they're just like,
Yeah.
"How did he know?"
It
It
was
was fun.
good.
And then I also like this moment too because he was very open because we didn't talk about it, but when he was there, James opened a gift and it wasn't a towel, it was a VCR. And we knew that Frank's secretary had decided, no, I'm going to send your brother the VCR. And I love that Frank, in this moment where he's on live television, he admits it. He goes, "Hey, the VCR is from oh God, what is the secretary's name? I'm drawing a blank. I hate myself.
It's all right.
Um,
It's
what is her name? I want to say it. I want to say it. What is
uh,
her name?
we'll find it.
Grace.
Yeah, it's Grace. Yeah.
Grace. So he goes. He goes. The VCR was from Grace, James. I got you a towel.
Yeah.
And then he says hi to them, and it was kind of like, again, it was him admitting that like he knew he messed up, and it's just a very vulnerable moment, and I really enjoyed that he did it.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're here at the climax. Well, past the climax. We're here at the ending here. So Claire sees this at the shelter, him pouring his heart out on the air live.
Yes.
And heads to the network with the help of the ghost of Christmas past. So he comes back with a cigar. What floor?
Yeah. What floor? It's so good.
Right. So as Frank and Claire reunite, Calvin comes up to Frank and speaks for the first time, reminding him to say the words, "God bless us, everyone," because he said, "Am I missing
Ah,
anything else?"
yeah.
Get choked up. "Am I
Yeah,
missing
dude.
anything
It's
else?"
good. It's good.
And he whispers, "God bless us, everyone." And
Yep.
Frank just wells up. And Grace sees this and she can't believe it that her son is talking again.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you know, so and by the way, before this happened, Frank's boss is in the room and or watching, and he's like, "We need to cut this. We need to cut
Yeah.
this,"
Yeah.
And Frank's joking, "Oh, they're probably gonna have my job." He's like, "Yeah, you better believe we're gonna have your job."
Yep.
And Bryce is thinking, "Yes, I got it. I got it," you
Yep.
know? But obviously, none of that happens. Frank sells everybody on the moment. His boss, everybody watching at home,
Mhm.
James, Claire, he sells everybody in the moment. And Donner did something really cool here by having Grace's son come and say God blesses everyone because, all right,
Yeah.
listen, you can convince all these people, but let's see if this little kid can snap out of this
Yeah.
mode that he's in. And obviously he did.
And it worked, and it was great. And I wanna point out how Eliot was a team player because he helped Frank, because when the boss
Right.
was like, "Who decided that Frank could go on the air right now?" And Elliot goes, "Oh, his name is Bryce." And he
Right.
goes, "Yeah." And it's like, "Oh, well, Bryce is done for." You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, Bryce is probably done for. Frank is most likely fired too, but Frank's not worried about that. And
Nope.
it was great. And
Yeah.
there's a really good emotional performance here from Bill Murray as Frank, because he's talking to the camera and you can see his eyes welling up. You can
Yeah.
see they're watering, and he's like, "You gotta want it." And he goes, and you gotta want life. And he goes, and I know that now, and I'm different now, and like you believe it. And he does such a good job that you can't help but feel it. And he goes, and it's and I haven't felt that way in a really long time. And like you
Yeah.
really
It's good.
feel it. You know what I mean? And the music's playing, and then as you said, Grace's son comes up and he puts the bow on it, man. And Bill and Frank is just like, "Anything am I forgetting, big man?" And he goes, "God bless us, everyone." And it's just like, and then the music cue starts picking up, and
Yeah.
you just feel it. He picks him up, and he like gives him like a little pinch on the cheek, and he goes, and the mom like she hugs him, and it's really really a beautiful moment. And then you see everyone starts getting into it. You see the boss at home, you see the people upstairs, like everybody's like, "All right, this is what it's about," and it's a really beautiful moment.
So before this, during the course of his monologue, he sees mistletoe above one of the dancers, and he says,
Mhm.
"Oh well, you know what I have to do, right?" So he kisses the dancer, and he's like, "Yeah, whatever." But
Yeah,
that was nothing because it's not who I really want to be with.
yeah.
I would rather be kissing the love of my life, Claire. And everyone at the shelter was like,
Loses
"Ah,
it.
Claire," and the one lady, the head of the censorship department, she's gone through. We haven't
Oh
really
god.
mentioned her. She keeps getting beat
Yeah,
up the whole movie, and she sees Bryce tied up next to mistletoe, and she she grabs the mistletoe and forces him to kiss her. So
yeah.
we had that, but eventually Claire comes, he apologizes, and they kiss on the air. They kiss and make up. Um, you know, everything's moved forward here, and Frank then leads the crew in singing "Put a Little Love in Your Heart," and
Yes.
sees Lou, the three ghosts, and the ghost of Herman smiling and waving back to him while singing along as the end credits roll. Frank instructs the people in the theater to sing along too.
It's so good.
Man, that would have been so cool to experience in the
Yes.
movie theater, you know?
I remember being a kid, and I didn't understand it when I first saw it, because he
Yeah.
kept saying, like, "You in the back," and I was like, "What is he talking about?" I didn't
Yeah.
understand, and then as I
Mm.
got older, obviously, I was like, "Oh, man." As a theater watch, this would have been awesome. Like,
Yeah.
especially with that, like, such an hopeful ending, and everybody's up, and then all of a sudden you have Frank Castle looking at the screen. He's like, "All right, now you sing it." I might have jumped in if I was younger, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
that, it just seems really fun.
And the movie closes out with James watching at home, and he hails Frank as "my brother, the king of Christmas."
The King of Christmas.
And that's our movie.
What a great
So
movie.
so my initial thoughts with watching Scrooge is that it's short, and I like short. You know that it
Mhm.
gets right to the point. We're at an hour and 40 minutes, so just a little over an hour and a half. Um, it is dark, but it's
Oh, yeah.
bright. But to balance it out, it's bright as well. It has bright spots, but there
Mhm.
are dark moments. There are some horror moments that we did touch on as we were discussing the movie. Um, my biggest thing here, and I got to give a shout out to this. It's a real Ghostbusters shout out. So as you all know, Bill Murray plays Peter Venkman in the
Mhm.
Ghostbusters movies. Ghostbusters being Ricardo's favorite movie of all time.
Yes.
And whenever I watch Scrooged, I think that Bill Murray is doing a caricature of Peter Venkman, not only from the movies, but from the animated show, because the animated Peter is way over the top, more
Yeah.
over the top than the live action, of course. And I do have to give a shout out to Lorenzo Music as Peter Venkman, also known as Garfield from the
Mhm,
80s, because let's look at the timeline here. Ghostbusters came out in 1984. The
mhm.
real Ghostbusters came out in 1986, and Scrooge came out in 1988.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Bill Murray had only played Peter Venkman once
Mhm.
before this. So a part of me, once again, this is just my little thing here. Maybe he got to watch the cartoon a little bit and said, you know what, I think I'm gonna incorporate that into my Frank character,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
next time I go to see it. So those are excuse me, the next time I go to perform, I'll incorporate, Peter Venkman into the character. So those are my initial thoughts. How about your initial thoughts upon this rewatch, Ricardo?
Upon this rewatch, and it's so great because this is one of those movies that is in my rotation every Christmas season. And every Christmas season, it gets me right into the mood, and I'm always blown away again that it's one of those movies that came out in the '80s that still holds up so well today. I absolutely love when we're able to watch those movies that we can watch from 35 years ago, watch it today, and it translates really well because the story is very familiar to us, but they were able to take a familiar story and add just enough spice to it, make it a little bit different, add some horror elements that were really fun, that I can walk away from it and still feel like, even though I'm familiar with the story, it feels really good that it can stand on its own. Again, there are many Christmas Carol films and animated films and stories and books. There's a lot of them, but this one always rings true as one of my favorites. I think Bill Murray crushes it in this movie.
Yeah.
I performance wise, and we'll talk about performances among everybody, but I was so used to seeing, again, because Ghostbusters is my favorite film. Whenever I saw Bill Murray, I always saw Peter Venkman first because as a
Right.
kid, that's who I attached to was Peter Venkman. So to watch him play this role of like this slime ball, this guy who just hated Christmas and was just, not a good person. Everything that I detested, I was like, oh, I hate him. And watch him be convincing in it, but also still find a way to make me not absolutely hate him. Like he was funny enough that I'm like, oh, he's a bad guy, but he's humorous enough that I can still kind of root for him. I want to see him change. And watching his process throughout the movie was just fantastic. And it was just another testament to how good of an actor Bill Murray is. But there's so many things to love about this movie. Again, we talked about great practical effects. Those are great. The horror elements, there's a lot of good humor in it, and I just think that it works. I think as a Christmas movie, it works, and I think it's one of those that will stand the test of time. So being able to watch it again and see it through the eyes that I've seen many, 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 many times and still enjoyed as much as I do. It's a testament just how good the movie is. And I always forget that Richard Donner made it. I always forget, and we talked about this. I always forget, and then the movie ends and it says Richard Donner. I'm like, wow! I always forget that Richard Donner made this movie.
Yeah. Richard Donner, the director of Superman,
Yeah.
the movie. Um, so let's take a look at the budget and the box office for Scrooge. The budget was 32 million, so we're looking at the
Hmm.
80s here, but it was a
Yeah.
box office success. Scrooged grossed 100.3 million.
In the
So
80s,
in the
bro, for a
80s,
third for a 30 plus million at 100, that's really good.
yeah, 100 million. So in addition to the box office, um, I like to mention the Oscars. Would you believe that Scrooge was nominated for an Oscar? So, yeah, here we go. It was nominated for best makeup and hairstyling.
Good, because it was
And
awesome.
and at the time it was only 3 nominees. So, it was Scrooged, Coming to America,
Ooh,
and then the winner. So, you want a hint? Late 80s, a move well, it would be 1988, a movie that was really good makeup. Alright, I'll give you a hint.
yeah.
Danny Elfman?
Danny Elfman, 1988. 1988. Okay. Danny Elfman. I like immediately I'm like
Who
Edward
all
Scissorhands?
alright, who does Danny Elfman work with a lot?
Tim Burton. So I was like, is it Edward Scissorhands? Is it Beetlejuice?
It's Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice? Okay. That was like 88. And I was like, oh, 88. Which was 88? Beetlejuice.
Yeah,
Ah, I can
yeah,
see Beetlejuice too. Beetlejuice has some great
yeah,
ones.
so it was Beetlejuice, and, I mean, well deserved, but I don't know, man, the design on Scrooge was awesome, I mean,
Scrooge was great.
Beetlejuice had a lot of no, the Beetlejuice did have a lot of great effects and makeup and
It did.
such, but
It did.
good for the Academy for recognizing Scrooge there.
I like that.
Um, let's give some love to the cast here. Um, Obviously, we both love Bill Murray as Frank Cross. Just,
Yes.
you know, like I said, just this really over the top character. And while he does play this despicable character, there are some lovable moments throughout the movie,
Yeah.
though. Bill Murray is Bill Murray. He's gonna make you laugh.
Exactly. Exactly.
He's gonna make you laugh. There are some charming moments here and there. And for me, like I said, I believe it's like an over the top version of Peter Venkman, but not until he like snaps back into that this is what we should be doing deal,
Yeah.
like that moment where he sings, I'm alive and so are you. I just saw Peter there,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, we have Karen Allen that we had mentioned as Claire Phillips. Um, we have John Forsythe as Lew Hayward, former mentor of Frank. Bobcat Goldthwait, an 80s staple, as Eliot Loudermilk. Um, we have Carol Kane as the Ghost of Christmas Present. We have Robert Meacham as Preston Rhinelander, the head of the IBC. We have Michael J. Pollard as Herman, the homeless man. We have Alfre Woodard as Grace Cooley, the personal assistant of Frank. So she's gone on to
Mhm.
do many things over the
Oh,
years since this
many things.
role.
Long career.
So we have John Glover as Bryce Cummings. Now, I got to give a Smallville shout out here. He
I knew
plays
it was coming.
he
I knew it
plays
was coming.
Lionel Luthor in Smallville, but he also plays the boss in Gremlins 2.
Listen, that's our second Superman reference that we got. We got Richard
Yes.
Donner, and then we have John Glover. That's it. We got it.
Yeah, some Superman references here, and I mean, I'm going to go even further here. Let's go a real deep cut. He is also the voice of the Riddler on Batman the Animated
There you go.
Series.
There you
So,
go.
John Glover is awesome. We have David Johansen, aka Buster Poindexter, as the Ghost of
Mhm.
Christmas Past, probably the scene stealer of the entire movie.
Oh, I love him.
That's between him and Ghost of Christmas Present. They both do such a great job.
Yeah.
Um, and while I'll give a small shout out to Kate McGregor Stewart as Lady Censor, the lady gets beat up the whole movie. So, and John Murray as James Cross, the brother of Frank.
Yeah, look, Bill uses two of his brothers. His brother plays his father, and his brother plays his brother. Like Bill Murray kept his brothers in this movie, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Thank you for mentioning that. I didn't mention that, so that's good stuff here. So, out of everybody, obviously Bill Murray's the MVP. He has to be the MVP. There's no
He has to carry the movie. He has to carry the movie.
This movie doesn't work without Bill Murray as Frank, and
yeah,
shout out to Karen Allen, just that sweet character, man. She tugs on the heartstrings the whole movie.
There's something about Karen Allen that it comes off so genuine and so likable. It doesn't matter. Like I remember when she did the Indiana Jones films,
right?
And she came back and did Kingdom of Crystal Skull. Seeing her again, I'm like, man, it's amazing how like she's just so likable. Like everything, her smile, she's beautiful, she's radiant. And in the movie, she plays the sweetheart perfectly because she comes off like a genuine sweetheart. And I loved her in this movie. And I think casting her was great because it makes it so much easier for us to get upset at Frank. Because how could you do Karen Allen that dirty, man? Like what you chose the dog over Claire, right, especially when Karen Allen is playing Claire. Like there's just something really, really likable about her and very charming, and very innocent. So she plays the role really well because I think that's what she radiates, and she's fantastic.
Absolutely. And the Ghost of Christmas Present, the Ghost of Christmas Past, they're both hilarious. I mean, the Academy already did a best makeup and hairstyling. Shout out to the designers, man. Like,
yeah,
this movie was already fun to begin with, but the makeup and the hairstyling really made it too. So
it did. And what I loved about it is that the Ghost of Christmas Past, like they all look so drastically different, our ghosts. Like he's the cab driver, so he's got the cigar, the bad teeth, he's got pointy ears, his eyes got dark circles, his hat, and he's like this obnoxious loud character. And then you have the Carol Kane as the Ghost of Christmas Present, where she's like, oh hello, and she flies and she's sweet, but then she can get really violent. And at one point she yells at him and grabs him by his tie. And she tells him like something like, if you don't stop, I'll punch your mouth so much that it won't hold soap. And it was just like, oh my God, like she just started to punch out all his teeth. But the design, she had the really nice dress and the wings, and she's flying. And the presentation for the ghosts were just they were so unique in their own way, and I appreciated that too. So the design team, yeah, you guys deserve all the credit.
So let's start winding down with our closing thoughts here. And I mean, we kind of already gave it away.
Yeah.
Is this your favorite version of A Christmas Carol? But for me, it's been my favorite ever since I saw it as a kid. And there's been other versions, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You know, some people list like one of the older ones. I think 1951, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. Like, just I think about that when I think about it. But there's been other ones. You know, there's been other movies called Scrooge. You
Yeah.
know, there was I mentioned the Robert Zemeckis one. That's the animated one with Jim Carrey. I
Mhm.
thought that was pretty strong. You said Spirited.
Yeah.
You know, you thought that was strong. There was The Man Who Invented Christmas. That was about Charles Dickens writing the movie. And then there's countless others called Just a
Yep.
Christmas Carol um, that we can name here. But for me, what Richard Donner did with
Yeah.
this movie is groundbreaking. And he was just like, you know what? I'm going to do a modern day retelling. I'm going to
Mhm.
call it Scrooge, instead not Scrooge, but Scrooged. You know, to kind
Yeah.
of make it stand on my own here. And let's get one of the hottest stars in the '80s to play the lead. Let's get Danny Elfman. Let's see what happens. And they made
Yep.
something magical. And has the movie aged a little bit when you watch it? Of course, it's aged. It's 35 years old. But as far as it feeling special and different and standing out from any other Christmas Carol movie or rendition, for me, it's hands down my favorite version. Of course, it is.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. It is also my favorite version,
Right.
even
Oh,
down to the
I'm
title.
right. I'm sorry. I got to give
Yeah.
another shout out. There was Mickey's Christmas Carol. There
Yeah,
was
dude,
all right.
there's a lot.
Yeah. All right. Let's put it out there. A Muppet Christmas Carol. That was fun
Yep.
too. You know, but you know, Scrooged. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, you're good. And I love A Muppet's Christmas Carol because Michael Caine plays it so serious. I love that movie.
Yes.
But I like even when it comes to Scrooged, I love the title because it was his way of saying like you're going to get a familiar story, but this is not about Ebenezer Scrooge. Like this is about Frank Castle. And I love that because it was kind of implying that look, we can apply this story to other characters. We can apply this story to unique characters and unique writing and unique stories that resemble what we know of A Christmas Carol, and we can kind of go meta and spin it on its head. Again, the movie opens up with them
Yeah.
advertising for Scrooge. So the idea of Scrooge exists to them. They understand what it is, which is what makes the movie so funny because Frank calls it out numerous times because I get what you're doing. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. I get it. And it shows why he's able to be stubborn and have that pushback. And I love that aspect of it because, again, the movie is aware of itself. And I love that Richard Donner did that. That the character is aware of what's going on. It's like, oh, we're gonna go do this spiel, right? We're gonna do this. Yeah, you think I'm gonna cry? I'm not gonna cry. You think I'm gonna get soft? I'm not gonna get soft. And it works anyway because it's a reminder of like what are the things that really matter the most. And there's a lot of great things to take away from this. Bill Murray was hot in the 80s, one of the top comedians going around, and it was very well known. Richard Donner, great name. Danny Elfman, great name, great score. You know, you can't think about Tim Burton without thinking about Danny Elfman. And just Danny Elfman is synonymous with a lot of amazing scores that people hold dear to them today. And, you know, myself included. So you've got a banger soundtrack. Even from the very opening score, I was like, okay, this is amazing. And then from our titular characters and whatnot, and our ghosts that are presented to us, it's funny. It can get dark. There's scary moments. I love when you can implement horror into comedy because I think that they're very similar in many different ways. It's about invoking a sudden emotion, whether, you know, comedy is laughter and horror is like fear and shock. And I love that they could blend it together really well. The cast does amazing. Bill carries this movie. And not to say everyone else doesn't do a great job. They all do. But again, seeing Bill from beginning to end go from Frank Castle, who we know, to the Frank Castle. Again, I absolutely love the end of the movie where he's breaking down and he goes, and I feel good. And I haven't felt that for a really, really long time. And his eyes are watering and you're like, man, he's given an amazing performance. So, you know, it is absolutely my favorite story when it comes to A Christmas Carol. Again, I love A Muppet's Christmas Carol. I love the Jim Carrey version. That one could be pretty dark too. I remember a lot of people being like, oh, like, can my
Right.
kids see it? Because it was relatively dark. And I think that this story lends itself to be told in darker ways. You can go family friendly with Muppet's Christmas Carol, and you can go darker with movies like that, and movie like Scrooged. And I love that aspect of it. I love the tie-ins. I love the meta humor. I love everything about it. So, you know, if you ask me, same as you, is it my favorite iteration of the Scrooge story? Absolutely, this is the one.
Yeah. And when we were getting together and discussing possibly doing a Christmas episode for the
Mhm.
holidays, because we didn't get to do it last year. We were already in that mode of just getting our feet wet with the
Yeah.
podcast, so we're already a year in, past a year in. Um, for me, it was just like, well, we should do a Christmas movie, and it was like we both thought about it at the same time. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we're doing Scrooge, right? Yeah,
Scrooge,
we're
right?
doing
We gotta do
Scrooge.
Scrooge.
We talk
Yeah.
about it so much, and we got to give love to this movie because for some people, it's a hidden gem. A lot of people don't know this
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
so I'm glad that we got to do that. So, alrighty, folks, that was the Panel Bros official breakdown for Scrooged. If you could please give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube at the Panel Bros, we'd appreciate it. As always, those subscribes help us with our reach and putting the word out there about the podcast more. If you could please let us know how you felt about our breakdown of Scrooged in the comments below, we'd appreciate that as well. Let us know how you felt about the movie and what's your favorite iteration of A Christmas Carol. Please let us know in the comments below. For Ricardo Segura, this is Anderson Marchak saying thank you for coming to the panel.